Why are there warships from Russia, China, and Iran parked off South Africa's coastline? Well, depending on who you ask, they're either here to flex their fleets, send a message to the West, or, according to some ambitious WhatsApp forwards, to protect us from an imminent US invasion. Now, the reality is far less dramatic, but no less interesting. So what's actually happening is a joint naval exercise called Willful Peace 2026, hosted by South Africa as part of a BRICS Plus exercise. Chinese destroyers, Russian corvettes, and Iranian warships have been sailing into false bays since last week for drills that our government officials insist are routine and perfectly in line with South Africa's non-aligned foreign policy. But the problem isn't what our government intends. It's how it looks to everyone else that's watching. So as we all should know, the number one rule in Fight Club, you don't talk about Fight Club. And as some critics point out, in geopolitics, the number one rule is that optics matter more than intentions. And so hosting high-profile naval drills with Russia and Iran, who are both under heavy Western sanctions and both actively engaged in conflicts that the West opposes, it sends a signal whether South Africa means it or not. And so that matters because the US remains one of our most important trade partners. And last year we saw firsthand how these tariffs and fickle trade agreements put thousands of local jobs on the line. And the timing doesn't help. At home, even our own government can't quite agree on how to explain this. The DA says that hosting the drills was reckless, while our defense ministry waves it off as no big deal. Abroad, though, relations with Washington are already strained, and globally, sides are being drawn faster than countries like South Africa would like. So no, this doesn't mean South Africa has picked a team, but it does show how difficult neutrality becomes when foreign warships are in your harbor and everyone else is already keeping score. So if foreign policy optics are strained, domestic politics isn't offering much relief either. What started as a messy internal fight inside the DA has now gone a step further. Former Environment Minister Deon George has taken party leader John Steenhuisen to the public protector, turning a party dispute into a formal complaint before the national watchdog. In his 84-page affidavit, George says that Steenhuisen used his position as both party leader and cabinet minister to push him out of his job last November. He claims that Steenhuisen then brought in Willie Okamp to replace him and argues that Okamp's family has links to wildlife industries that George has been trying to crack down on. Now, Steenhuisen rejects the claims, saying that George is hitting back after being removed and has misunderstood how cabinet decisions work. Okamp has also responded with his own complaints, accusing George of misusing government resources and fabricating a whistleblower report to justify an investigation into him. And the timing makes this harder to ignore for the DA. You see, Steenhuisen is heading into a leadership vote in April, and local elections are coming up later this year. So as you can imagine, these public fights are damaging enough, but once they spill out in front of the public protector, they stop becoming an internal headache and start becoming a very public one. So while politicians argue there may be a big change coming that touches basically everyone with a phone, millions of South Africans lose data they've already paid for every single month. Weekly bundles, daily bundles, monthly bundles, all with these built-in expiry dates. Now, the good news is that the regulators are moving in to stop that. But the bad news is that there's a chance that this backfires on the people it's supposed to help. So ICASA, the telecoms watchdog, is finalizing rules that would force networks to let unused data roll over instead of vanishing overnight. It is a response to years of Parliament calling data expiry a violation of the Consumer Protection Act. So if and when these rules come into force, MTN, Vodacom, and other networks would be required to allow unused data to roll over instead of expiring immediately. Now, it's important to note that the idea here isn't unlimited data that lasts forever. It is rollovers with defined limits rather than instant expiry. But some consumer groups are sounding alarms over how this gets implemented. You see, if rollovers aren't done carefully, networks could respond by scrapping the small, cheap bundles that most low-income users rely on, or just raising prices across the board. And so the people who buy hourly or daily data could end up worse off. And so the question isn't where the data rolls over, it's whether these new systems put South African consumers in a net positive position, or if it just makes these options more expensive and harder to reach. And before we cruise on to our Bagel Bite of the day, here's a couple other headlines worth knowing. For starters, the IEB's class of 2025 recorded a 98.31% overall pass rate, with nearly 9 of 10 candidates qualifying for bachelor's study, despite a larger and more diverse exam cohort. A surge in Chinese car imports has pushed South Africa's trade deficit with China to 136.6 billion rand, as nearly half of all new cars sold locally now coming from Chinese brands, increasing further pressure on our domestic manufacturers. And after some public backlash, Discovery has noted it will absorb the costs of a claim system error that overpaid some members in 2025, reversing payments and refunding those already charged. And before our Bagel Bite, just a quick housekeeping mention. We've officially launched Business Bagel, a channel dedicated to South African business and markets news. And for now, it's only available on both TikTok and Instagram. At this stage, any business-related stories from this show will simply be repurposed there as reels. So depending on where you're watching, we've either tagged the Business Bagel account or you'll find the links in our description. And so yeah, if business is your thing, go give that a follow. Right now, we just focus on building momentum, but we've got some really exciting stuff lined up in the weeks ahead. And on to our Bagel Bite of the day. Let's see what you got. The question is, which country was the first to introduce a plastic banknote? Was it A, Canada, B, Uzbekistan, or C, Australia? We'll give you the answer at the end of the show. Yesterday, we touched on why South Africa still uses the word matric, and almost immediately a follow-up question popped up in the comments. Why did South African schools used to label the years standards, like standard 5 or standard 10, and then switch to grades? I mean, I love it because it's actually one of the easiest ways to tell generations apart. If someone retells a story from standard 5, they probably experienced chalkboards and corporal punishments. And if they said grade 5, they likely had Google and smartphones. So the old standard system came from British-style education, where a standard wasn't just a year, it was a benchmark you had to meet. And if you didn't pass the standard, you didn't move on. So repeating the years was common and progression was conditional, not automatic. Then after 1994, South Africa overhauled its education system as part of a broader reform. And one of its goals was to modernize and align with international norms, where most countries use grade-based systems. And so from there, Standard 10 became Grade 12, Standard 9 became Grade 11, and so forth. Same destination, just different wording. And as for that Bagel Bite, the answer is Australia, the first country to roll out banknotes on plastic material back in 1988. They last longer, they don't tear, and they are much more difficult to counterfeit. And my friends, that's it for today's show. Please be sure to subscribe both to this show as well as to Business Bagel. Really appreciate it. On that note, hope you guys are having a fantastic start to the week. Be kind to one another, and we'll catch you all tomorrow for round 3. God bless.